In the small, forgotten town of Grimsby, there was an old antique shop that few dared to enter. Its walls were lined with dusty shelves, filled with ancient objects no one seemed to care about, except for one. In the darkest corner of the shop, hidden under a tattered cloth, hung a portrait. It was known as the Death Portrait. Legends whispered about the portrait, though no one knew its true origin. Some said it was painted by a mad artist, while others claimed it was the work of a demon. What everyone agreed on was this: whoever had their portrait painted by it would soon die under mysterious circumstances. Elena, a young art student with a fascination for the macabre, heard about the painting and couldn't resist. She had been searching for something to make her mark in the world of art, something dark and different. When she learned of the shop and the infamous portrait, her curiosity got the better of her. One rainy afternoon, she found herself standing before the antique shop. The door creaked as she pushed it open. The smell of mildew and age hit her like a wave. As she wandered the aisles, she felt the air grow heavier, colder. In the corner, beneath the ragged cloth, she found it, the Death Portrait. The painting was of a man, his expression locked in a twisted mix of fear and pain. His eyes seemed alive, almost pleading for help. Elena could feel the chill of the portrait seeping into her bones. But instead of running, she reached out and touched the frame. Careful, a voice croaked behind her. She spun around to find the shop's owner, an old man with sunken eyes and a hunched back. "That's not something you want to be messing with," he warned. "I'm not scared of an old painting," Elena said with a smirk, trying to mask her unease. The old man shook his head. "It doesn't care if you're scared. It takes what it wants." Ignoring the warning, Elena asked if she could buy the painting. The old man hesitated, but after a long pause, he relented. "It's your life," he muttered under his breath as she left the shop with the painting wrapped in cloth. At home, Elena hung the portrait in her studio. As she studied it, she felt an odd pull toward it, an almost hypnotic attraction. That night, she dreamt of the man in the portrait. In the dream, he was alive, reaching out to her, his eyes full of terror. Days passed, and strange things began to happen. The paintbrushes in her studio would move on their own, and shadows seemed to flicker in the corners of her vision. The more she stared at the portrait, the more she felt a presence watching her. Then one night, as she was working late, she heard a faint whisper. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the whisper grew louder. It was coming from the portrait. "Elena," the voice hissed. Her heart raced as she backed away from the painting, but the whisper followed her. "Help me," it pleaded, the man's painted eyes now looking straight into hers. She tried to cover the portrait, but the cloth wouldn't stay. The whispers turned to screams, and the studio lights flickered. Desperate, she grabbed a knife, thinking she could destroy the painting. But as she slashed at the canvas, the face of the man twisted in agony, blood oozing from the cuts. Elena, his voice was everywhere now, surrounding her. In a panic, she fled the studio, but the man's face was burned into her mind. No matter where she looked, she saw him. In reflections, in shadows, even in her dreams. The next morning, they found Elena's body in her studio. Her face was frozen in a look of horror, her eyes wide and unblinking. On the wall, the death portrait hung untouched. But now, there were two figures in the painting, the man and Elena, her face contorted in the same expression of fear. The antique shop owner, upon hearing the news, simply closed his shop and locked the door. He knew the portrait would return, waiting for its next victim, as it always had. Because no one ever truly left the death portrait.